Okay, but we are going to move on. We're going to continue kind of on this crime thing, but of a different nature. And here joining me on air is Martin Preib. You've heard from him before. He is a retired Chicago Police Department detective, and he has a Substack as well. And his Substack is called Crooked City. And so you can catch all of his writings there. He's just amazing. And I frequently read his information, and one of them really caught my eye. And that's when he was talking about the city council's ritual of not merely, he says, merely being the most blatant corruption in the country, but it's an attack on the basic values holding the republic together. And he goes on to talk about, just how out of control they are, and especially when it comes to settling police cases. So, Martin, I want to thank you for coming on The Real Story.
Thanks for having me, Gina. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so, you know what, before we actually get to that, and I think it's a really important thing, even the Chicago Tribune weighed in about all of these payouts to cops. And so, I mean, before we get to that story, though, I just lost my story here. What is going on? After that, before we get to that, though, I did want to talk about Larry Hoover. I mean, Trump commuted his sentence. Now, I believe he was supposed to be serving 200 years, including for murder. And, again, this is Chicago gangster disciple. I mean, when you read the stories about him, he was apparently even conducting business very cushy down in Vienna, Illinois, from a prison there. He ended up going to the Fed because of what he was doing there, basically doing organized crime from that prison, got caught doing that. Then he gets charged with federal penalties and ends up in Colorado. And so now, what's your take on this whole thing? The whole commutation because, I mean, there's a lot of Chicagoans who are just very upset about it.
Yeah, it came out of nowhere. I've talked to a lot of prosecutors, a lot of detectives. I've talked to a lot of retired detectives who worked cases tied to Hoover. And, this guy is the worst of the worst. And the gangster disciples, has just been terrorizing Chicago and other cities for decades. And I'm a big Trump fan. I like almost everything he's doing. But I think a lot of people in Illinois or Chicago are scratching their heads. And for me personally, I've always felt that the Republican Party has never really understood Chicago and understood the nature of its corruption, how bad it is, how intensely radical it is. And, you saw that with the shooting of that kid shot that poor couple out east. Mm-hmm. And, I don't think the DOJ has ever really had, even going back to the 70s with the Weather Underground bombers and the FALN bombers, I don't think they've ever grasped what a hotbed of all this Chicago is.
Well, no, it's a good point. I mean, Bill Ayers grows up in Glen Ellen. His father is like a ComEd executive, or Exelon executive, one of the two. They owned each other at that time. And then he ends up, after all the damage that he's done, all the, civil unrest he generated, all the bombings actually, gets off on some sort of technicality, and then becomes a professor at UIC and retires. It's disgusting, on a full pension.
I think the thing to understand about that movement from the 70s is there were two sides to it. One of it was this violent radical terrorism, the bombings. But the other side of it was those radical groups from the late 60s and 70s, they were always trying to turn the most vicious killers and rapists into the victims of police misconduct or prosecutorial corruption. And a lot of the cases I think are blatantly falsehoods. But they get so much support from the media. I think one of the great failings in Chicago is the media is not functioning in this city at all, in Illinois. So they do two things. They're very deeply involved in stuff like Black Lives Matter and demonstrations and riots and even, violent activities against the system. And on the other hand, I think they've really learned how to turn criminals into like these victims and then these folk heroes, and then make them rich in federal lawsuits. And it's far more effective than any bomb throwing from the 70s. It does far more damage to the system. So for Trump to make a decision, I mean, there's 3 Spanish Cobras in Chicago who were charged. 2 of them were convicted for the murder of a police officer. And the charges were vacated by Kim Foxx. And there's a lot of police and prosecutors who want them to be recharged and retried for the murder. There's overwhelming evidence of their guilt. And haven't seen any movement from Eileen Burke yet to recharge those guys. But I've reached out to the DOJ and said, well, if she won't, you should do it. This is something the DOJ should be working on, not worrying out about a guy like Larry Hoover. I don't. So we're all kind of mystified by it. But a lot of people think that there's some kind of design here, or something's going on.
Some sort of outreach to the black community. And let me tell you, I spent the last 2 days listening in to most of what was happening in the Illinois House and then somewhat in the Illinois Senate. One, because, I care about this. I care about the public policy, too. I knew that the budget was going to come up, and I knew it was going to be a disaster. And sure enough, it was. And we're going to talk about that in the next segment. But while we were talking, State Rep Marcus Evans, who I know pretty well, he introduced Larry Hoover's relatives. They were standing in the galley. And he introduced them and welcomed them and said they just want to hug their loved one. Like he was pleading an outreach to Governor Pritzker. You know what? Sure, he's released from the feds. Now we want you to release him from the state. He all but said that, Marcus Evans.
Well, I mean, that's what a lot of people are talking about. What's Pritzker going to do? And it kind of puts Pritzker in a trick bag. But even so, I don't see the upside to this, and I just don't think it's probably the first decision Trump has made where I'm sort of scratching my head. But this radicalism of representatives bringing Hoover's relatives up on the stage, it's very deeply entrenched in the political system. I mean, Chicago and Illinois is deeply tied to the most radical ideologues in the country, and they drive that policy. Gangs have a lot of power, going all the way back to the Black Panthers in the 70s and the late 60s. Jeff Fort, the leader of the El Rukns, he was once invited to Nixon's inaugural ball because these guys disguised themselves as social activists, as trying to help the community. They even got grants and loans back in the 70s. Well,
I mean, let's just go down that road a little bit. The ABC 7 report on this. His son Larry Hoover Jr. said he deserves redemption. He deserves a second chance at being part of this community. He can be a benefit to the community if they want. And what they've done, and they do a lot of this, and probably some of it's okay, but I think it needs to be monitored, is they turn them into violence prevention nonprofits. They turn themselves into some sort of violence prevention nonprofits, and then before you know it, they're getting hundreds of thousands of dollars, in some cases millions, from the state government to do quote unquote violence prevention measures, which I really want to see the actual, well-penciled study on the results.
Oh, yeah, the cops are very cynical about that whole movement. It's another hustle. It's another hustle?
Mm-hmm.
The criminal mind is highly recidivist. So when you take criminals and then you try and repackage them as social activists or as violence prevention, it's a very, very sketchy.
Well, I mean, Larry Hoover is 74. There's quite a possibility he's done. He's finished with that time of his life. He's learned his lesson. That's great. I do believe that can happen. And I know some people who have been in that same sort of situation, not murder or anything, but can be, their felony convictions now turn their life around, now trying to help people on the streets. And I do believe that there are good people doing that. I do believe that. I just not sure that we should be handing them also the keys to the city and hundreds of thousands of dollars right away to do that type of stuff. I just don't believe we should. Hey, we're going to take a short break, Martin. We're still going to keep you on. I want to talk to you about the payouts that are going on. Apparently, soaring Chicago police lawsuit payouts are set to hit a record amount. That's Chicago Tribune headline today. We're going to talk about this when we get back from the break. This is The Real Story with Jeannie Ives.
Now, more of The Real Story with your host, Jeannie Ives.
All right. Welcome back. We still have Martin Preib on the show here. Again, his Substack is Crooked City. You can read everything that he writes about, mainly policing issues in Chicago. But, what's really something that he's always talked to me about is these police lawsuits and the massive payouts that people get. And in many ways, it is a hustle. And, of course, you have the Chicago Tribune headline again, soaring Chicago police lawsuit payouts hit record amount, and more are on the way. It says Chicago spending on police misconduct settlements and other police lawsuits is soaring this year, and the steep price for taxpayers could rise hundreds of millions more. Through May alone, the city council has already approved at least $145.3 million in taxpayer payments to settle lawsuits involving Chicago Police Department, a record number that dwarfs sums from past years, according to the Tribune analysis. That amount, far above the $82.6 million Johnson and Alderman budgeted for settlements, verdicts, and legal fees involving the department, does not include many smaller payouts that face less aldermanic scrutiny. What's going on here, in your opinion, Martin?
Well, they created this industry. This exoneration industry is sort of the culmination of this movement that we've been talking about since the 70s of suing police officers. First, they get them out of prison, and they do it with this unbelievable media narratives driving them. The sickest, most twisted media I've ever. As a writer, I find it all so offensive. And they create a tremendous amount of pressure. And once they get one settlement against one detective, they open up. They go back and look at all the detectives' arrests. And it's quite easy to go back into the prisons and ask these offenders, were you arrested by this detective? And then they push this pattern in practice, and they build case after case. And they've been doing this for 40, 50 years now. And foolishly, the right wing in this country, didn't nip this in the bud many years ago. They sort of gave them a little bit of money and hoped they'd go away. And it just fed this movement. And it's a tremendous funding of the radical left. A lot of this money, these billions of dollars that's going to be paid out in these cases, many of which I think are completely false.
Alderman Ray Lopez, in the same article was quoted as saying, we have to stop settling every single time in this room. We have to learn that in some situations, while tragic, they are not our fault. They are not the responsibility of taxpayers. And, can you give us an example to talk about this?
I could say I'd like to respond to Alderman Lopez. He has voted so many times in cases to make these guys millionaires where the cases are blatantly nonsense. So, I like Alderman Lopez in a lot of ways, but, that's a very tepid, vapid, apologetic, political little rant there that it shows you how these aldermen do not look at these cases. They do not investigate them. They don't talk to the detectives. They don't look at the facts. They just go ahead and vote away the taxpayers' money. But
how has it changed policing, if at all?
It's destroyed the police department. Mm-hmm. It's completely destroyed the police department. I think the police department is on life support. All the veteran, hardworking detectives are retiring or leaving. The morale is terrible. A lot of the new guys coming in aren't really learning how to do the job. They're afraid to do basic things because they're afraid they'll be sued for it. The war on police is very intense throughout the country, but nowhere more so than Chicago. And now this is important, Jeannie.
Okay.
They're moving from the police department to the prosecutors. There's a bunch of campaigns saying, these prosecutors, through misconduct, they ruin these cases, they convicted the wrong guys, like these Spanish Cobras. And so it's expanding, not just to the police. They're going after judges, prosecutors. And it's like this Frankenstein monster that if you don't, that's starting to run wild. And no one on the right, particularly the Illinois Republicans, really seems to have the sense of duty to fight it.
Well, you did write in your latest Substack that the expansion means new markets. Towards that end, the movement has initiated a campaign to overtake the Cook County State's Attorney's Office in the same crusade with which they now hold the city captive. That campaign is now at the precipice, leaving every Cook County State's Attorney, active, retired, or in private practice in the same web of lawfare that has strangled the police department. I mean, if that's the case, we're not going to get anything done because right now it doesn't seem like our prosecutors can even get to all the cases that are happening. I mean, it's crime. It's a crime spree in Chicago, and people know it. That's why they're not going downtown.
It is, and the big test right now is whether Eileen Burke, the new prosecutor, is truly going to be a reformer. Is she going to re-indict these Spanish Cobras? That would be the first step to say, we're going to stand up to this movement on behalf of our prosecutors. These are prosecutors who gave their careers to putting the worst offenders in prison. They're tried, superb attorneys, prosecutors. They have a tremendous sense of duty, and they're just being ripped to shreds by ideologically driven media. And
well, do the judges have a part in this? I mean, top story on CWB Chicago. Yes. 8 years for carjacking Lyft driver while awaiting trial for 7 juvenile cases. I mean, these judges are just the prosecutors may want to keep him in jail, may want to charge him. You're coming up against the Safety Act. You're coming up against Judge Evans, who wants everybody out. You're coming up against, Sheriff Dart, who's letting people out of his jail. I mean, what's going on?
It is. They have if you're a judge and you're standing up for the police and fighting criminals, they're very mobilized. They will initiate a campaign to have you voted off the bench, and they will drag you through the mud on the media. And they've done this to a lot of judges. A lot of judges who were once real strong has gotten weak. A lot have retired. A lot have been voted out because they've mobilized campaigns against judges, and it's really a sinister movement, and it's very, and people don't understand what's really happening. And this is where I would love to see Trump's Department of Justice get involved in Chicago.
Yes, we do need that to happen. Hey, Martin, that's all we got time for this segment. Thank you so much for joining me on The Real Story.